the newer generation really wants to be able to have that flexibility, right? Why are we thinking in terms of it starts at 3, ends at 11? Why can't it be a 1 to 9? Why can't it be a 10 to 8? Maybe it's I only need a Monday through Thursday and I'm doing a 4/10s, similar to what kind of nurses deal with. Maybe it's 3/12s. That's actually an FTE equivalent, right? So that's how you can actually fill a weekend shift. Most people don't want to work weekends. I used to love working weekends because I used to do 3/12s. It was fantastic.
Rising above the buzz of ultrasonic cleaners and the clanking of stainless steel are the ideas and voices that are changing an industry. You're listening to the Beyond Clean podcast, the central nexus for the people, processes, and products that are improving our sterile processing world. Each week, we speak with frontline technicians, CEOs, engineers, and entrepreneurs with a common goal to help you fight dirty every instrument, every time. Whether you are tuning in for education or inspiration, we're glad you did. Now turn on those washers and turn up the volume. It's time to go Beyond Clean.
Today we're speaking to Jason Minutillo, the original director of quality for HLD and sterilization and the system co-chair of cleaning, disinfection, sterilization at the University of Colorado Hospital. Jason's going to be talking to us today about the data of sterile processing staffing. We're going to be diving into things like, hey, what is FTE anyways? What's the difference between productive and non-productive hours? And why should everyone in the department care about these topics? If you're a brand new technician, if you're an educator, if you're the manager and director, no matter where you sit in this, all this staffing data matters to you, because what it means, are you going to have other team members right beside you in decon, or are you going to be there by yourself? I think we all want as many people as we can get to help us to get that volume through. And once we get them, we want to be able to keep them. So we need data to have those conversations. So hang here with us. We'll be right back to start this conversation with Jason Minutillo.
I'm Justin Poulin.
And I'm Hank Balch.
From 17 Studios, you're listening to Beyond Clean, the global voice of sterile processing.
Joining us now is Jason Minutillo, the original director for quality, HLD, and sterilization, and the system co-chair of cleaning, disinfection, and sterilization at the University of Colorado Hospital. Jason, welcome back to the show. This is not the first time that you've been on Beyond Clean, but it's nice to have you back again.
I appreciate being able to return. Thank you for allowing me.
So just in case folks might have missed your previous appearances, do you want to fill in any other gaps? I know I kind of gave you title, but what else should people know about you?
Well, let's see. My name's Jason. I'm your friend. I've been in sterile processing for over 20 years, and I've worked my way up all the way from baby tech all the way up to where I'm currently at, where I manage program around quality. So specifically around high-level disinfection, but I also dive into the SPD world, but that's mostly where my background is sterile processing.
Love it. Love it. Yeah. What a time to be in high-level disinfection and trying to be working all those things out at the same time that the industry is trying to get them all worked out for the manufacturing side, and then the regulatory side is trying to get it all worked out. I mean, wow, crazy time.
That's exactly it. It's a very unique position that I'm in, that I get to see both sides of that, but it does, play into our, we'll say future state and what that looks like. It's going to be crazy.
Yeah. Yeah. So, that's obviously a conversation that we should probably be talking more about on the podcast and on the platform, just all things HLD related. But we've actually got you on this episode today to talk about something kind of completely unrelated, but I guess you still need people and data on the HLD side as well. But we're going to be talking about quantifying our technicians and the data that's around all these sterile processing conversations regarding staffing. So let's just maybe start kind of entry level, maybe for some folks who have never thought about the data and staffing conversation before. Give us an overview of the kinds of data that's involved in sterile processing, staffing, and recruiting and decision making.
Absolutely. So you've got terms like PTO, FMLA, FTE, productive versus non-productive, orientation. There's just so many different terms and that come into that. So let's kind of just define some of those real quickly. And to your point, Hank, quality comes into play with this. That's why I'm also on part of this discussion. So PTO is paid time off. FMLA is Family Medical Leave Act. That's actually a regulatory piece that you have to play into and kind of ties into PTO or non-productive time. FTE means full-time equivalent. For those of you who are kind of brand new into this world, think of full-time equivalent as a full-time employee. That's the way I've always kind of helped put me into it. Productive hours is, obviously what is being produced. So in SPD, it's obviously trays. In the HLD world, it's a clean scope or a clean device. And I say clean, high-level disinfected. And then non-productive hours are, those things that most people don't really account for. And that's really where we kind of get eaten up in that. And that's, the answering the phone, transporting things, moving a sterilizer rack from one area to another, those kinds of things. So all of those play into what's called productive time, and that's determined by each facility and each hospital, right? So this is where the conversation can go way into the weeds, but how do you define what's productive hours in sterile processing? And Hank, you know this very, very well. Can it be minutes of service? Is it cases produced in the OR? Is it GI procedures? Is it percentage of minutes? Is it, and frankly, all of them have their pros and cons. I think there's some more pros to cons, and some of the other ones that we'll talk about later, more around, we'll say, tray production and more along the lines of instrumentation inspection. But that's something that we can go into further.
Yeah, that's very helpful. And I remember as a new manager, was the first time I really got confronted with a lot of the jargon and keywords you just threw out there. I remember sitting in some of the bigger meetings with other managers and directors, and like they're talking finances and they're throwing out all these things. I'm just sitting there like, not knowing what the heck is going on around me. And like, there's decisions being made that impact my department and impact other people's departments. And they're like, yeah, so like, what's your FTE count? And how about those non-productive hours? And like, how are we going to do this? And I'm just thinking like, oh man, I must have missed this section in the certification exam or the sterile processing training manual because I felt unprepared.
So did I. I mean, that's really what it boils down to, is just being exposed to it, right? But yeah, you kind of sit in there initially faking it till you make it. But unless you have those questions and raise those questions, and you have a friendly place to ask those questions, whether that's a higher supervisor, higher manager, director, business manager, partner, whatever the case may be, you can get lost very, very quickly.
Yeah. So the first takeaway maybe from this interview is, if you are like me or like Jason when you first got started and this is all still foreign to you, obviously you want to finish this interview. So hopefully we'll have some takeaways that'll kind of enlighten you a little bit more, but also try to find someone in those categories that Jason mentioned that's just like a safe person to ask and say, hey, I'm just going to be transparent. I don't know what's going on with this. Can you help kind of walk me through the budget, the recruiting, the paperwork, just all the jargon, because it is important. And the more you're able to converse in this language and with this lingo, just the more confident you're going to appear in those meetings, and the better you're going to be able to advocate for what your team actually needs. So it's annoying, but it's the language of the industry. So it's really important that you learn it, especially as a department leader. So I'm kind of talking about some keywords here and some concepts. So let's start talking about, how does this kind of data and the categories of data that we just threw out there, how does it inform the strategy and the productivity, like your approach to productivity and efficiency of a sterile processing department? Like, what are we doing with these kinds of data?
Well, to take a step back, first off, most of these supervisors, managers coming in are probably just told this is what your FTE count is, and this is what your productivity standard is, whether that's trays, percentage of minutes, cases in the OR, whatever that case may be. So you have to first off establish what the productivity measure is to then determine what your FTE counts. Again, how many staff are you allowed to have? And so it's really initially a conversation with a business manager or finance and one of those personnel to find out. But that's what drives how you staff your department. We'll give examples. I'll try to be as brief as possible with those examples, but maybe you're a department that's based on cases produced. So, okay, you've got 100 cases. You're allowed 1 FTE for every 5 cases. So figure that out. That means you're allowed 20 people. Now, 20 people doing all of that work. Those of you who are brand new into the world, you're producing anywhere between 5 to 10 trays per case. Is that enough FTE? That's for you to kind of determine. And again, you're coming in, you got to be able to, first off, learn the language, but then be able to push back on when those inefficiencies pop up, those non-productive hours, those non-productive time wasters, answering the phone, running to the OR, running upstairs, maybe in relation to where you're sitting. Maybe you're 3 floors away from the OR. That's a long way. Maybe you're across campus. That's what we had to deal with here at UC Health. We have literally a tower where we don't even have an SPD in there. So they have to transport everything across about a half mile, a quarter of a mile back and forth. So, you got to take that into consideration. So, but that's where it starts.
That productivity metric, like I know, that's one of the many metrics that we're going to talk about, but you're right. That's kind of the keystone to all these conversations. They're all either coming from the productivity metric or they're kind of feeding into the productivity metric. And on the frontline perspective, like as a technician, we hear productivity and that just means, well, we need to work faster, basically. But from the leadership perspective, as you kind of alluded to, it really comes down to strategy. Where are we deploying our worked hours, and not how long is it taking us to do these things, although that's important, but how long should it be taking us to do these things? And how can education or, process improvement impact that speed and that efficiency that you kind of brought up? So all that, it's all working together, but we're coming at it from different perspectives.
Well, you just nailed it. It's a double-edged sword. Ultimately, like I said, you don't want to have wasted time, but you don't want to have you be so productive that you're not getting everything done in that regard, right? So you have to have that fine balance. But yeah, like I said, it's that double-edged sword that you talk about, and it's playing into that. A lot of frontline staff look at it as I have to do work faster. Managers and leaders are looking at it as how do I use the current staff to do what I'm supposed to be doing, and how do I make it more efficient?
Right. And, in our other interviews, we've talked around automation and robotics, understanding that people are not machines. So just because you're able to run a particular level of productivity for a long amount of time doesn't mean that you can do that for 6 months straight or for 12 months straight without really grinding people down, and they either leave or they tune out, and you still see that drop in productivity, and then everyone's freaking out like, what's going on? Well, it's because we were treating them like numbers instead of people. But speaking of numbers and people, this kind of brings us, to this first category of data around full-time equivalents. They're obviously crucial to managing staffing in a budget that you already have, but they're also important for the recruiting side, like how many people or, what's the head count that you're able to recruit into. So can you explain how FTEs are used in staffing these sterile processing and HLD departments? How does understanding these FTEs help us to make better staffing decisions?
Man, that's a big question. So let's unpack it a little bit. With regard to, again, FTEs, productivity standard, that's how you maximize what that looks like. So how many staff can you have? Well, that's also dependent on your workflow, your operations, what quality metrics you might have to be putting in place. Let's say you've been allowed by the productivity standard to hire 10. Okay. Well, you have two openings. There's going to be systems that are going to be going on behind the scene, what's called ATSs and CRMs. ATSs stand for applicant tracking systems, and then CRMs stand for candidate relationship systems or management systems. Usually your CRMs are internal, your ATSs are external, and what that means is you're using your FTE to say, I have two openings. I'm going to go to my CRM and place a rec. Okay, a requisition for an FTE. Your partners, whether that's human resources, recruiting, maybe they're a combination, maybe it's an outside company, is going to go ahead and work with you, and they're going to not post both positions. They're going to only post one rec. So that's that ATS side of things. Now, that means you're going to slow the candidate pool down a little bit, but that allows you to be able to do the interviewing process. You also don't want too many recs open because then it looks like, wow, what's going on with that place? Right?
Yeah, am I going to be the only one who's working there?
Exactly. So there's that. There's a fine line between controlling a rec being put out externally to internally, if that makes sense. But how that's driven though, again, is by that productivity measure. Again, you're allowed 10. You as the manager, you need to look at that through an efficiency lens and say, can I get away with maybe holding for 8 for a moment while I get the right person in place? Oftentimes, I think we get into a sterile processing world. It's fix it now. And so you're just hiring to hire. That's not going to work out well for you in the end because you're just going to burn people out. And especially if you bring in the wrong person to your culture, it's not good either.
Yeah, that kind of goes back to two cliches. First cliche is probably the most common of just throwing money at a problem. The other one in healthcare is throwing bodies at a problem. Now, we don't have a lot of bodies these days to be throwing at problems, but if you are able to get those recs open, to get the approved positions that you mentioned, it's that much more important in the problem. Let's say it's the gap in staffing, or it's the gap in productivity, or maybe it's a gap in quality, like maybe you're getting bioburden into the operating room, whatever that challenge is. It's not just a pulse and a scrubs, like a pair of scrubs is going to solve it. You really do want to make sure that you're getting that right FTE into those hours. And I want to call out something else too, like maybe you've had some experience with this, but in looking at FTEs, that's that kind of 40-hour equivalent, right? So like one FTE equals a 40-hour work week. Well, have you seen scenarios in looking strategically, again, as a leader, where you need those 40 hours, but you don't necessarily need them all on the same shift? How do you maybe break that up into part-time positions or maybe a PRN position? You didn't really talk about that. Can you kind of speak to that? Like, okay, I'm approved, but now how do I put these little puzzle pieces together to actually help us?
Absolutely. Man, you took the words right out of my mouth because I was actually going to start going into, part-time employee and, efficiencies. So I think a lot of people, we think of, okay, we start at 7, we end at 3. Next shift comes on at 3, ends at 11. 11 to 7 is the next shift. And we think of these 8-hour chunks. And especially in this day and age, the newer generation really wants to be able to have that flexibility, right? Why are we thinking in terms of it starts at 3, ends at 11? Why can't it be a 1 to 9? Why can't it be a 10 to 8? Maybe it's I only need a Monday through Thursday and I'm doing a 4 10s, similar to what kind of nurses deal with. Maybe it's 3 12s. That's actually an FTE equivalent, right? So that's how you can actually fill a weekend shift. Most people don't want to work weekends. I used to love working weekends because I used to do 3 12s. It was fantastic. So kind of cutting edge on that side. But I think we often look at, again, it's just a straight block time. What we need to start looking at is you need to look at your throughput based on the work that's being delivered. So think of the day as a bell curve. And for those of you listening, a bell curve is on the front end. It's very, very, very minimal amount of work. And then it kind of ramps up and creates a giant bell and then comes back down. So most of your work is going to come in the middle of the day, depending on when your start times are for ORs and GIs and other areas. So why are we staffing 6 people at the beginning of the day at 6 a.m.? We should be staggering those starts and moving those. So you could do the same thing with even with part-time employees. Maybe they can only do 20, but could you have them do 4 hours, 5 days a week? maybe fill that gap for lunches. I've done that in the past where I've had my part-time person come in and literally cover for lunches 5 days a week, 4 hours a day, 12 to 4. Covering all of my lunches. Everyone was still on point, got their lunch. They weren't burnt out, and we kept productivity going on. So, there's some ways that you can use part-time or, half FTEs to be able to do those processes. Maybe they're quarters. Again, you can get a little creative with that. And that's where you got to look at it from an efficiency perspective. So,
yeah. I mean, that's a challenge to the status quo of staffing. Is really what it is. And I know as a manager and director who has changed my schedule in my department, that's not an easy thing to do because there's cultural implications. Obviously, there's just practical implications. If someone was hired on at a particular shift, their whole life is built around clocking in at 6:30 and, clocking out at 2:30 or 3 o'clock in the afternoon. And so even to shift that an hour, it has impact on who's going to drop the kids off at school or who's going to pick up the kids or who's going to do the handoff for grandma and grandpa. But all that being said, those things can be navigated to your point about being flexible with some of these additional new recs maybe that open up. So maybe your old timers, maybe their schedules, don't have to be really impacted that much, but as you're hiring on new people, you begin to cycle through these more creative staffing to better meet that bell curve. And especially on the weekend shift, just yesterday I was talking to a sterile processing director down in Florida, and it was the same thing as getting people to work weekends, and no one wants to work weekends. It's always hard. And then you got to lose them during the week if they're a full-time employee. So they got to be off on Thursday. It's a busy day. They got to be off on Friday, and it's a busy day. And we were just talking about how awesome it is to be able to build a weekend staff, a dedicated weekend staff. They know how the weekends go. They know which doctors work. They know the flow of everything from Monday cases. And then you get consistency. So you always know it's Jason and Wanda and Monica. They're coming in. That's the weekend crew, and they got it covered. I think that's a really, really good thing for people who are listening. If you don't have a weekend shift, and you're able to kind of shift these resources around, consider it and look and listen to what the data is saying to say, hey, does this make sense for you to modify that staffing? So that's a great call out. Let's talk about quickly. I know we kind of referenced this earlier, but that productive versus non-productive hour conversation. How do these concepts influence the staffing strategy and the scheduling strategy that we're kind of talking about? How should folks be thinking about that?
Yeah, great question. So I think you can look at this in two different ways. I think one, is looking more towards the future. How can you automate some of those things? Is it, using technology, maybe robots for transport? Maybe it's, hey, we don't need, maybe it's a conveyor belt for pulling things out of washers. Maybe it's a conveyor belt for moving things from one place to another. Again, those are technologies that are already present. And then there's going to be future technologies that come out with those things. You've got the one-way sterilizers where one-way flow sterilizer rack gets pulled out and it's already cooling. Nobody had to go around to the other side and do that process, right? So there's, I know future technology is going to be coming out in the decontamination world, right? Where, hey, you can literally put a tray in, you can hook everything on up. It's going to do all the sonication. It's going to do all the flushing, brushing. You still have to do some manual cleaning, of course, but then it's now going over into the automated washers. And that's actually where the automated washers came from, is how to speed up that process. So there's going to be those efficiencies that come in. The other piece of it that you can look at is, again, you've got an FTE count. Well, maybe you use some of those part-time to be able to do some of those moving of things, or you chunk out your day so that, hey, the last couple hours is all of that moving if necessary, if it's able to afford it. Maybe you can't afford that. So like I said, maybe it's using, again, we'll say an entry-level tech for those, those jobs to get them acclimated to SPD. Back to the non-productive hours, that's where you can actually plug in, depending on your hospital systems, orientation hours, right? So, hey, these are going to be your orientation persons that they're actually not being counted as productive, but you can still get work out of them, if that makes sense. So trays still can be put together, transport can still occur, sterilization can still occur. So, but you got to, again, think strategically, and you got to see if that's actually allowed to do based on your company's policies and procedures.
Man, so many great topics we're referencing here. I could take this interview so many different directions, but, but I'm trying to stay focused here. Yeah, like even the comment about, those orientation hours and how creative you can get as a leader to say, okay, our orientation is going to take, 3-6 months, maybe even longer, depending on the complexity of what that person is being oriented to. But that doesn't mean at the end of 2 weeks, we couldn't teach them to do one thing. What's that one thing that they can safely do without, someone holding their hand? And that one thing helps everyone else be more efficient, to your point. So I think, really breaking down that barrier and that misconception again to the status quo that, hey, just because the orientation is 3 months doesn't mean we got to wait 3 months for that person to contribute. It just means we can't really set them loose into the wild until all of their competencies and everything else has been done. So yeah, like that's a whole other podcast interview. So we'll have to put a pin in that. But I do want to get your perspective as a leader, because I'm sure you have seen this. In a lot of our budgets, our leaders, sometimes our educators, even like our instrument coordinators, their hours are kind of categorized in that non-productive hour bucket. And yet we pull our managers and our educators to the floor on our busy days to get the volume through. And so what that does to the data is, the CFO is like, you got plenty of people because we got all the volume coming through and you've only got this many productive FTEs. But what they don't see is, the manager hasn't been in their office for the last 3 months and the educator hasn't done any educating for the last 6 months because they've been right there on the floor, elbow to elbow, just trying not to get buried. So have you seen that happen in the space? And how do we use the data to show that that's not a sustainable solution either?
Well, so if you haven't seen that, you probably haven't been in this world very long. But with that being said, that's part of the reason why, depending on where you're coming from, that's where you need to initially establish what is those hours, how do you create the productivity, and how is productivity measured, right? So let's say it's, again, case volume. Okay, well, again, you've got 20 cases coming through, you're allowed 5 people. You're absolutely going to be on the floor. There's no way, because the amount of trays produced in a total knee versus a endoscopy case is totally different. And as we get more and more specialized with minimally invasive surgeries, that's going up. So I think a lot of hospitals are moving away from, we'll say, case volume and moving towards a different model, which is fantastic, thank God. And we'll talk about that further. But back to that original, piece. Yeah, it's there. And I think a lot of hospitals are starting to realize that the error of their ways of counting SPD managers, leads, educators into that productivity model and really not safeguarding the non-productivity piece of that. Again, as a manager, and again, we do this to ourselves. We know our teams are struggling. We're going to jump in. The good manager, that's what they're going to do. Well, you don't see that happen very often in the OR. So why are we allowing that to happen? And so it's that conversation now with the bean counters, the finances people, the CFO. Hey, you don't expect an OR manager to be on the floor in an OR every day. You shouldn't expect your SPD manager, myself, or a director to be in those roles as well. And so explaining the like for like, again, because it's two sides of one coin. You got to be able to show that data though too, right? So yeah, we've been, for the first 3 months of my tenure, oh man, we were 80% productive. Now I've been on the floor for the last 3 months. We've been 100% productive. There's where those 20% is coming from. I'm on the floor. And you have to show that. You have to capture that.
Yeah. Well, the other side to that double-edged sword that we kind of brought up at the beginning is, sometimes we fear the data instead of leveraging the data. And what I mean by that is like one of those big KPIs, for efficiency and productivity is how many trays are left unprocessed at 7 a.m, right? Like that's a big one. And we want that number as leaders and technicians, we want that to be as low as possible. But if that number is big, and if we're guarding those non-productive hours because we've got to educate, because we got to do quality checks, because we got to coordinate all this instrumentation, because we got to manage and build schedules and coach people, if we're guarding that time and those numbers are actually higher at 7 a.m., even though that data looks bad, you could use that bad data to then take back to the bean counters, like you said, and say, hey, we got 200 trays down every single morning, and you're not giving me enough people to get it done without pulling all the rest of us off of all of these other very important tasks. So I think that's very, very important for people to take away from this interview as well. Is it's not just we want the data to look good. If the data is bad, leave it bad and then do something with it.
You nailed it. You nailed it. That's exactly it. I mean, I can tell you from, I was a manager, got pulled into a trauma one where literally they were 290 to 300 trays down every morning. You can't operate as a trauma one needing anything and everything available with 300 trays down. So we literally left that data for 3 months and then showed a month with me and my educator and my supervisor just putting trays together that we were able to get it down. Now, granted, at the time, we were being measured by, again, case volume, which really would needed to be changed. And that actually led us to doing some time studies. And we can talk about that a little further. But because I was showed it was ugly when I got hired on, 2 months into it, we're still ugly. It wasn't just because the leadership needed to change. It was the processes and the measurements needed to change. That's what actually started the process change. You said it's a double-edged sword. I actually looked at it as an opportunity, and I think that's what you need to do.
Yeah. And, even in times of improving the process, sometimes that process tweak makes one of the KPIs look worse, right? So like if you start following the IFUs in decon that you've never brushed or flushed appropriately, and you start doing that, well, you're going to have more trays left over in the morning, most likely, right? So that data point looks worse, but now your quality is actually getting better. So yeah, you're right. There's always opportunities in just being able to surface this data, but then you need that leader with this kind of data acumen to then take it up the chain and do something productive with it in terms of staffing and recruiting your department. So I wanted to get into PTO in this conversation. I can already tell we're not going to have enough time. So I'm going to put the PTO aside. We'll have to have you back for another PTO conversation, because that's like, we could do a whole interview just on paid time off, how to manage it, how to strategize, the implications. That's like a super hot button topic. So I don't even want to touch that right now. But let's talk here towards the end about leveraging data for predictive staffing. One of the coolest conversations out there, I think, today. And then we'll close after that with what's next. Like, what are some of the big lessons that have been learned, and like, what should we be looking forward to in the future of staffing and data? So yeah, let's talk first. How can we leverage all the data points that we've been talking about today to help us to know how to staff for tomorrow and for next week? And then again, leverage that with some strategy with our HR teams as well.
Absolutely. So again, figure out what your productivity standards is going. That's how you started out with, right? So I'll give you the example what I was originally going into before. We were originally at this hospital I was at. It was around cases in the OR. I went ahead and changed it over through a time study. I took a time study of everybody in my department and got it to trays processed. Now, because we did the time study, it was 22 minutes of hands-on time during inspection. And that's what we really what we wanted to be able to capture, because that was key to making sure that we didn't have bioburden, we didn't have issues, quality issues. So with that equates to roughly 3 trays per hour per tech. Okay. Now you can start doing predictive modeling, right? So we're currently doing 10,000 trays. Well, in a month, we're going to be bringing on 3 brand new heart surgeons. Number one, I'm going to meet with that team, that heart surgeon team, the all 3 surgeons, and find out, can they use the instrumentation we currently use for their procedures? Number one. Number two, if they can't, do we need to build new trays? Does that includes training aspects behind it and the whole 9 yards? But ultimately, at the end of it, let's say 3 months from now, I'm going to be processing 13,000. I now have the ability to calculate how many FTEs, full-time equivalents, that I need to be able to do that. That's where you want to get to. That's, a good year of work to get it done. Like I said, that's where the predictive modeling comes in. So now, I've got a person giving notice. Well, now I can go right to my, human resources and say, I've got to put a rec in. I want to fill this one. I also need to put another one behind that because we are expecting 5 more surgeons coming in. And that means my volume is going to go up to 5,000 trays on top of the 10,000 I'm currently doing. That's how we actually predictively not model. Now that's how it worked for me. I know that there's others that use percentage of minutes, some that use, instrumentation processing. So how many instruments you process. Those are all things that you still got to figure out what an average employee or average tech can do to be able to start that. So you should do some sort of time study within your department, even if you already know what the productivity measure is, because that's the starting point and the starting discussion. Does that help?
Yeah, it does. And like even your comment about, hey, we're getting new surgeons in, which probably means additional volume, which with volume means additional trays, which means I'm going to need some hours coming from somewhere to help to reprocess that. And I can't tell you how many times that conversation does not get connected to onboarding new surgeons, to what's the impact going to be to sterile processing, both for the staffing piece and then obviously for the instrumentation piece too. We're like, hey, you got 3 new surgeons. Awesome. What trays are they going to use? Oh, yeah, the trays everyone else is already using at the exact same time. This is probably not going to work. So, yeah, productive staffing and then predictive inventory, all of that is huge there because now we finally got the data to be smart about it. So, fantastic conversation here, Jason, but I want to end on the future. And today, what the data can tell us high level, but also what would you like to see maybe next 5-10 years to be able to do to leverage as a department leader around this staffing data conversation that we've had today?
Absolutely. So I think this is twofold. One, I'd love to see the industry as a whole come some sort of standard with regards to comparison of we'll say FTE production and budgeting and the whole 9 yards. So again, is that minutes? Is that percentage of trays? I don't know. Like I said, that's something that has to be determined, but I think more and more are moving away from a case standard, which is fantastic. That's really going to help in terms of an apples to apples comparison, because I know everyone on this or everyone who's listening has been in those meetings where it's like, well, the hospital across the way is able to make it happen, and you're going, yeah, but they're not measured the same way. So that's number one. Number two, I'd love to see what the automation piece comes in and how that starts affecting, we'll say, the non-productive hours. But I also want to make sure with that we are guarding those non-productive hours, because again, we really do need to be standing tall and strong as managers, educators, supervisors, directors, that we shouldn't be pulled into that FTE matrix to be able to do things, because otherwise you're going to have quality suffer, and from there education, and now you're going to have burnout. So that's what I think.
Well, terrific insight this year today. I think we hopefully challenge a lot of folks to think outside the box when it comes to staffing. We definitely introduce a lot of very important concepts. So if anyone's listening, Jason, and they're not already connected to you, or maybe they have some questions for you after the show, what's the best way for them to track you down?
Probably LinkedIn is probably the best, or you can email me at UC Health, but LinkedIn's probably the best. Jason Minutillo. Okay.
All right. Well, thank you for coming on the show today and for being so passionate about this topic.
Absolutely. It was a pleasure. Thank you again.
And that was Jason Minutillo, the Regional Director for Quality, HLD and Sterilization at the University of Colorado Hospital. What a fantastic data-driven conversation around recruiting and retention and staffing in general of our departments. Like I said, there's 100 different applications to what we talked about today, from just building schedules. Do you have a weekend shift? Do you have a night shift? Do you have those cross shifts that Jason kind of mentioned? What does it look like to advocate specifically for those specialized positions, those leadership positions like supervisors, educators, instrument coordinators, to keep them off the floor in order to do what their job is required to do? we can all process instruments, and many times, like Jason said, we got to jump in to lend a hand. But there's other things in the department that also have to be done in order to push us forward. So a lot more conversation to be had on this topic, but I'm really excited to get some of these data categories out for you guys and start to define these terms and prompt additional conversations, additional changes maybe to the way that you staff and recruit. And like Jason mentioned, please reach out to him if you have additional questions. If you'd like to potentially be a guest on a future Beyond Clean podcast, reach out to us at info@beyondclean.net. We'd love to talk to you about that, even if it's a topic in sterile processing staffing. Like I said, we just scratched the surface today. If you're new to the show, maybe this is the first episode that you stumbled upon, you can find all of our episodes on the Beyond Clean podcast channel on iTunes, Stitcher, Google Play, iHeartRadio. But you can also download the Beyond Clean mobile app on Apple and Google Android app stores. Download the app, and if you love us, give us a 5-star rating and a glowing review about just how much you love my Texas accent or anything else that you want to say about the show. And, if you're not already subscribed to our Beyond Clean email, we shoot this episode out every Monday, the educational show, but then we also have all kinds of other content that comes out through that newsletter. We got blog articles, we got vendor spotlight episodes, we got virtual events that we host every month. So make sure to get subscribed to that newsletter. You can track that down at beyondclean.net. Just scroll down to the very bottom. And we're going to wrap this up by just reminding you, like we say all the time here at Beyond Clean, keep fighting dirty.